On behalf of the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement and the Water Policy Center, it gives me great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers, chair, and participants who have joined this session. To chair this session, we have Mr. Shakti Sinha with us today. It is my great pleasure to introduce the chair. Mr. Shakti Sinha is the director of Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Policy Research and International Studies at MS University, Vadodara. He is distinguished fellow at Indian Foundation. Mr. Sinha was the former director of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library and was part of Indian Administrative Service from the 1979 batch. He also served as the Joint Secretary in the Prime Minister's office in the past. Without extending further, let me request Mr. Sinha to take off the charge of the session.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the very kind invitation. One, of course, at the beginning, before even starting the session, I must compliment the Nepal Institute, Prabhat Jaiswal and his team, the Water Policy Center, Rao Sabhaskar and his team. Remarkable to organize such a large series of webinars over 3 days, such so many people. I mean, in the olden days, when we organized conferences, nightmare to do it, and now to do it on the web for 3 days is very remarkable. This topic is very interesting, very relevant. I do not want to speak right now as a chair too much. I thought that, and I've been listening to sessions for the last 2 days, so I have a feel of what's happening. And so rather than give my own point of view, and today we have 3 speakers. We're supposed to have 4, but now we have only 3. Dr. Namrata Saxena, unfortunately, is not well. She had a very interesting subject to speak on CPEC, but that as it be. So we are also comfortable in the sense of time. So unlike the other sessions where the speakers had to be rushed through, our 3 speakers today have the comfort of speaking over next 30 minutes, 20 minutes each, 20 minutes each. Om Prasad is in a hurry to speak. Let me finish speaking, but yes, you have a slide ready. It's all right. So we have these 3 very interesting, very different perspectives that we'll be getting on. I will not use the word again, though the topic is post-pandemic, but as a lot of people have said, we're still in the middle of the pandemic. But yes, it's good to visualize the future so that at least we are somewhat prepared for it. We may not be perfectly prepared for it because we don't know what will happen, but if we look at all the different aspects of it, like this morning, I was listening to a talk by Dr. Balveer Arora on water federalism, and how the pandemic can exacerbate inequalities and therefore make it more difficult. So there's so many different aspects to it. We just think in strategic terms, in terms of big power politics, in terms of hegemon and etc. That we don't really think there's so many other aspects to it. So I'm glad that today's 3 speakers have again chosen 3 very 3 different topics. So without further ado, and all 3 of you have 20 minutes. At about 17, 18 minutes, I'll give you an indication. Your time is running out. So please start winding up. But again, as I said, we have the time, so might as well express yourself properly. So our first speaker is Dr. Gane Om Prasad, Sikkim. He'll be speaking on a very interesting topic which I am very fond of because my ancestors come from that part of the world. It's the India-China border trade through Nathola and how the impact of COVID on it. Of course, in the older days, the main point of trade between India and Tibet in that sector was the Jelepla. But over the past 50 years, it is Nathola which has now become more prominent. So, Om Prasad, can I request you to start
Sure.
speaking?
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. I hope you can see the screen, the presentation screen.
Yes, yeah. And if you can make the entire thing, so that we don't see the sides,
Sure.
And it's very rightly placed because he's at the Department of Political Science of Sikkim University. And Sikkim is the main entry point there. So I think over to you. Yeah, this is much better now. See?
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. And first of all, a very good morning to one and all. Let me express my gratitude to NICE and the Water Policy Center for inviting me to present my paper on this international conference on post-pandemic world order, navigating the new normal. Since the given time is around 15 minutes, I have divided my presentation into 3 parts.
Take 20, don't worry. Take 20 minutes, take 22 minutes, don't worry.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Kind of, sir. Thank you. Sir, I'll be presenting the presentation in 3 parts. The first part deals with the historical background to the Nathola trade. Second part talks about the present status, and the third part talks about the impact of COVID-19. The This is the Nathola border. The other side, the blue tin, we can see that is the China part, and this side is the India part. During the trade times, this gate will be open, and the vehicles pass through from through this gate to from this place to that place, and that place to this place. If you look into the Nathola, the brief background to the geography of Nathola, Sikkim has three international borders: China from the north, Nepal from the west, and Bhutan from the east. That way, Sikkim is located in a very geostrategically very important position for India. Nathola is even the east district of Sikkim and situated at around 56 kilometers from Gangtok. The nearest Chinese border town is Yadong, which is around 52 kilometers from Nathola, and the Lhasa is around 450 kilometers from Gangtok as well as from Nathola. And for that matter, Lhasa is closer than Kolkata. Nathu means listening ears and La means pass. So in Tibetan language, it is the pass of the listening ears. The pass is located at around 4,310 meters, which is approximately 14,140 feet. Makes it a high altitude trading point between India and China. And it is a major tourist attraction for both Indians from this side and Chinese from that side. This side, Indians can visit the Nathula with prior permissions. The permits will be issued by the Tourism Department of Government of Sikkim, and vehicle permit also has to be procured from the same department. On the other hand, the Chinese can come up to Yadong town, and these days, for the last 1 year, they are allowing the Chinese tourists to come up to Nathola. If you look into the brief history of the Nathola trade, in modern times, the Nathola trade route between India and Tibet could be traced back to early 18th century. In 1772, Warren Hastings, the then Governor General of India, initiated the efforts to establish the diplomatic and commercial relations with the Tibet, between British India and Tibet. As part of it, he sent two missions, one in 1774 and another in 1783. The 1774 mission was headed by George Bogle, and the 1783 mission was headed by Samuel Turner. And they were sent to the Tibet as British missionaries to discuss various aspects of their relationship. And these efforts were halted for some time during the Cornwallis period. He adopted the non-intervention policy in the trans-Himalayan trade. The Treaty of Titalia, which was signed between the British and the Maharaja of Sikkim, has allowed the East India Company to trade with Tibet through Sikkim. Again, in 1853, the British officers like Campbell made a list of articles which were to be imported and exported between Tibet and Sikkim, and the company felt that the Tibetan wool would be great profit to the British manufacturers. Then comes to the 1861 treaty between the British India and Sikkim, and the 1861 treaty has provided the concessions to the trade. In 1863, H.C. Wake proposed to construct a good road to Tibet via Nathola, and this good road would be beneficial for the British for the trade as well as for the military purposes. Again, in 1870, J.C. Horton, the commissioner of Kuch Bihar, he proposed to remove some barriers for free trade with Tibet so that the Darjeeling tea can be exported to Tibet, and Darjeeling tea could be also be promoted. In 1893, some trade regulations were imposed by British, which restricted the import of the Tibetan Chinese tea from Nathola to this part, and accordingly in 1904, the British force reached Lhasa and made the Lhasa conventions with the Tibetans. The Panchsheel Agreement of 1954 did not talk about Sikkim trade because the Sikkim was not formally an Indian state, and it was only a protectorate under the government of British India. The Nathula was sealed between 1962 to 2006 because scope of the conflict that happened in 1952, and it was reopened in 2005 after a series of deliberations that took place between India and China. So this series of discussion started with 1988 when Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, visited Beijing. The discussions gave importance to the bilateral cooperation and exchange of in trade, culture, science, and technology, and aviation and other fields. So during that visit, India China signed two agreements to establish a joint working group and also a joint economic group. This marked the India's recognition of Chinese sovereignty over the Tibet. In 1991, the MOU between India and China on the resumption of the border trade was signed, and as part of it, a protocol on custom regulation, banking arrangements, and related matters of border trade was discussed and signed. And in 1992, a MOU was signed on protocol on entry and exit procedures, which contained the guidelines for the border trade through Nathola. And this protocol had 5 articles. According to Article 1 of the protocol, India agreed to designate the Changu, a place near Nathola, which is around 10-15 kilometers, as a venue for the border trade and also a mark for the traders, the Tibetan traders. And the Chinese side, they designated the Rinkinggong in Tibet as the venue for the border trade market for the Indian traders who would be visiting there. And according to the Article 2, the two sides agreed to use the Nathola as the pass for entry and exit of persons, means of transport and commodities. Uh, then each sides they established checkpoints at appropriate locations to monitor and manage their entry and exit through the Nathola Pass. According to the Article 3, all the provisions of the memorandum on the resumption of border trade, which is for the other trading routes, Jalapla, for example, Shipkila, etc., to be applicable to the Nathola route. Also, in 2003, the memorandum of border during the visit of Indian Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee to China, the two sides concluded a border trade protocol to add border crossing between Sikkim and Tibet Autonomous Region. And in 2005, the Chinese President Hu Jintao visited India, and during that time, they emphasized the regional peace and cooperation through economic development between the two countries. The two countries have finished the formalities to open the border trade between India and China through Nathola, and after that, in 2006 onwards, the border trade began from May to November every year annually, and the trade continues for Monday to Thursday in a week. After the negotiations on the items which are permitted for the trade activities in 2006 and 2012, they published two lists of imports and lists of exports. The the items which can be imported, like the wool, goat skins, etc. All these items are exclusively produced in Tibet, and the items which are allowed to export, for example, the agricultural implements, blankets, copper products, clothes, textiles, these are all also to produced in Sikkim and nearby regions. So the 2006 list of imports and exports consisted around originally around in 2006 list consisted 15 items for import and 29 items for export. The revised list in 2012 have increased it to 20 items for import and around 36 items for export. If we look into the status of the Nathola trade, only the Sikkim subject holders, the Sikkim subject card holder, the kind of identification that the person belongs to Sikkim, only they are allowed to conduct the trade. And now at the moment there are around 300 traders who were issued licenses by the district collector. And out of these 300 traders, around 120 to 130 traders are women. And the Indian traders can go up to Yadong, the nearest town in Tibet, and the Tibetan traders can come up to Cheratong, which is located near Changu Lake. When it was started in 2006, it is primarily based on the barter system. The valuation of goods will be done by the Tibetan traders, and the valuation of their goods will be done by the Indian traders. From 2010 onwards, the monetary system is introduced, and now that most of the trade takes place through dollars. Even after introducing the monetary system, the valuation of goods still takes place based on the mutual trust and not based on the printed price, etc., etc. If you look into the trade data is procured from the Ministry of Commerce, Department of Commerce and Industries, Government of Sikkim, which is the nodal agency for the trade to happen between the two countries through this Nathola. The data shows that the overall trade increased from mere 1.97 million rupees combined in 2006 to around 482 million rupees by end of 2019, which is a substantial increase. Initially, the imports dominated the exports, but over a period of time, we can see the exports dominating the imports. In 2016-17, the trade even went up to 870 million rupees, which is approximately around 82 crore rupees. Similarly, in the post 2013-14, we can also see that a substantial increase in the trade volume took place. And this increase can be attributed to the list of items, revived list of items which were introduced in 2012. The items like ready-made garments, shoes, quilts, blankets, carpets, local herbal medicines, Tibetan local herbal medicines, processed food items, flowers, fruits, spices, and religious products, etc., etc., butter lamps and ready-made garments and handicrafts and hand looms, the local herbal medicine. So these are the items which contributed to the substantial increase in the trade volume that took place between India and China after 2013 and 14. Similarly, the trade suffered sometime in 2017 because of the Doklam issue. Most of the time the trade was closed and security concerns were also raised. Now I'll come to the third part of my presentation, that is the impact of COVID-19. We can, through the data, we can see that exports higher than imports, and probably it is the very rare places where we can see Indian exports are dominating Chinese imports, and the balance of payments is in favor of India. The exports, mostly the exports which are related to the essential commodities are very in demand in Tibet. This year, since there is no trade took place, the borders were closed and the Sikkim was virtually locked down. No trade took place between the Tibet and India. Nathola trade is important for two aspects. One is the Nathola trade recognizes Chinese recognition over India's suzerainty over Sikkim, and also on the other hand, it is important for the Chinese in the sense that China now can push for India's imports into Tibet because of the cost as well as because of the location, and it will be economically viable for Chinese to allow Indian food commodities into Tibet. That's why that aspect is also it is very important. So there is a huge dependency of Tibetans on the products like coffee, tea, barley, rice, flour, maida, vegetables, dalda, vegetable oil, canned food, spices, kerosene, wheat and processed food items and fruits. Since these items are not grown in Tibet, the dependency is quite heavier on the Nathola trade. And because of the close down of the border, the Tibetans they had to suffer in accessing these food items. Most of the food items they had to import from the mainland China, and which is not economically viable for them, and also the cost of procurement is quite higher compared to the products which are reached from the Nathola. Most of the items that India exports to Tibet goes to Lhasa market. 80% of these items goes to Lhasa market, and remaining 20% items goes to the other places like Shigatse and Yadung and other local markets. It is not only the access that the food that the Tibetans are getting to Nathola, but also it is giving employment to a large number of workforce. It's a livelihood for the traders, the porters, the workers, the truck drivers, taxi drivers, etc., who are dependent on these things from the other side. There are around 400 traders, registered traders from Tibet, uh, and every year around 5,000 vehicles they engage from the Tibetan side engaged in this trade. From on the other hand, the close down of the border trade because of the COVID has affected the traders in terms of the credit. I mean, since the credit and cashless trade also goes on, many of them are worried, concerned about the credit that they have given last year in 2019 to the Indian traders, and Indian traders given credit to the Tibetan traders in 2019, and many of them are worried. Their worry also is regarding the opening of the Nathola border because of the ongoing tension between India and China, security tension. And since India has banned the platforms like WeChat and other things, the mode of communication is severely affected. Otherwise, every year the Traders Association of Tibet and Traders Association of Sikkim would meet on video conferencing and on through various ways communicate with the Tibetan traders, and Tibetan traders would communicate with Indian traders, and they also look into the items to be brought from that side to this side and this out to that side. So the mode of communication was disrupted. As the online communication is affected, and most of the time the ISD calls either the Indian traders to whom I was speaking, they said that most of the time the ISD calls have no responses on that side. So the traders are worried on two aspects: one about the credit that they have given to the traders each other, and also about the future of this Nathola trade because of the security reasons. India is now taking a hard position on China. On the Sikkim side, around 6,000 vehicles they pass to Nathola every year, and around the 300 registered traders. There are large number of workforce which are dependent on this trade: porters, workers, vehicle repairers, truck drivers, the vehicle drivers and carriers, etc. And it also provides direct and indirect employment to more than 1,000 people, including traders and all other workers. And the trade accounts for around 80 out of the official data. 80 crore is an official data, the trade between India and Nathola. On the unofficial, it is more than 150 crore. And the economic activity takes place is worth of around 200 crores. So because the COVID has stopped all these activities, and many of the traders and workers had to change their livelihood because of this problem. And the trade is not only helping them to find the livelihood, but also benefiting them economically. The earnings that they have taken can be diverted. The profits can be invested in other businesses, and it is helping the locals as well as the region from the trade. Not only Gangtok but also Siliguri depends on Siliguri market also depends on the Nathola trade, apart from the imports from Nepal. So when I was talking to the traders, the Indian traders, they said that 20 to 30% of the traders, they started selling their vehicles because they failed to repay the loans that they have taken for the vehicles, and now they are thinking to divert to other business because last year also 2017 also they have witnessed some sort of problem, and 2020 also seeing the double blow in terms of COVID-19 and the border tension. So many of them are now thinking to divert their attention from the trade to other businesses. At the same time, if you look into the items which are imported and exported to Tibet, there is a huge demand in Tibet for the pharmaceutical items, medicines. They are demanding that India should export them the medicines, pharmacy products. Sikkim, in that sense, is one of the leading hubs in the pharmaceutical production. Sikkim hosts around in overall total companies, around 80% of the pharmaceutical companies in the country have their branches and production units in Sikkim, from which they export their items to the nearby countries as well as to rest of the country. So in that sense, Sikkim produces huge number of medicines, and the Tibetans, they are demanding for the import of pharmacy and other items from Sikkim. On the other hand, Sikkim also produces around 60 to 70% of total cardamom in India, and exports to cardamom to many Middle Eastern countries and other places. So they are also demanding for the import of cardamom from Sikkim. Other products like cosmetics also have a huge demand in Tibet. Jute items, sugar, also of huge demand. Since these items are not listed for exports and imports, they can be included for the in future. When I spoke to the Department of Commerce here, they have informed me that last year they have submitted a revised list to the Government of India, to the both Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Finance, for permission of these items to be exported as well as imported. If these items are exported and imported, then the trade volume will be huge, and also will be helpful for India to reduce the gap between exports and imports. The moment out of the total trade, China exports more to India than what it imports. So that kind of gap can also be filled with this. Some sort of fill up can happen through this. Of course, there are fears that if you open many items, the mainland China items will be pumped into Indian market, and that will be harmful to the Indian traders. But these kind of items can also be explored for export purpose. The another problem is the quantitative and qualitative restrictions on the goods. The freight is around 2 lakh rupees per consignment limit, and this is a major barrier in terms of increasing the volume of trade. And the post COVID-19, if Government of India can rethink on, if in case it would like to continue the trade relations with China and to rethink on the items to be exported to the Tibetan market, then it can explore the Tibet for better purposes. Now let me take you through the border areas through some photographs. This is the place where the Shertang market is located. India-China border trade takes place. It is under the Department of Commerce and Industry in Government of Sikkim. And this is the mart, Shertang mart, to which the traders, the Tibetan traders, they come and they dump their goods and sell their products, and they take Indian products from this side to the side. The vehicles which carry the goods from the Tibetan side to India, and from Shertang market to other parts of the Sikkim as well as other parts of regions. The vehicles which are parked will come for the trade purposes, and probably this is the internet cafe, and probably the internet cafe located on the highest altitude in the world. We can also see the branch of the SBI on the background.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Prasad. See, I'm so glad you spoke on this seemingly small topic of border trade. See, most of us are so obsessed with the larger picture that we miss out that in the larger picture are very, very small components of it. And you brought out not just the historical details but the limitations. And the reason I mention this is that while the broader India-China trade is going on today, despite what is happening in Ladakh, despite the fact that the Chinese are not moving at all and are refusing to negotiate in good spirit, the fact that the market which is affected by it is the local market on the India-Tibet border at Nathola, and that the smaller traders who have invested money, who have bought vehicles, who are giving things on credit, they are the ones affected by it, while the larger trade is still going on. And this, I saw a study actually of the Atari-Wagah border also last year, how the shutdown of it. So the larger India-Pakistan trade is separate, but the local elements of it, the local aspects of it, how much it has affected. In Amritsar, of course, the number of people employed in the border trade is much greater than the 1,000 odd figure that you cite for Sikkim. But for Sikkim, 1,000 is a lot. And if there are so many hundreds of vehicles involved, 6,000 cross in a year, even if per day 100 cross, 150 cross, it amounts to a lot of vehicles involved in the trade. And the interesting point to raise, of course, is that the demand, the border trade is as confidence measure, but doesn't really impact on the larger thing. It's more a peoples to people, a contact kind of a thing. If you look at the volumes, even in the year which went up very heavily, I think it was 2015, 16 and 16, 17, it was 60 crores and 63 crores of exports in rupees, which of course has limitations. It can be much greater. And as you said, the demand in Tibet is for pharmaceuticals, is for cardamom, is for cosmetics, is for sugar. And therefore, if you really want to develop border trade in a real way of benefiting communities on both sides, we have to be a little more open about it. And unfortunately, as I said, these are since a smaller picture, and most of us are obsessed with the larger picture that they miss out. I'll only close before I call the next speaker, is just to point out one little thing, is the use of terminology. The Tibetan name of the town is Yatung. In Chinese, it becomes Yadong. But in Chinese, they don't say Tibet either, they say Xizang. So in that sense, Yatung is the Tibetan name. When you say Nathola and Yatung and Tibet, then I think we should say Yatung and not Yadong. But that's a very minor point. But since only yesterday Xi Jinping has said that Tibetan Buddhism must be Sinicized, must be made Chinese.
Yes.
So, you can see the effect of the Chinese attempt to, in one sense, homogenize the whole People's Republic. The effect of the Chinese Communist Party homogenize the whole country into adopting one standard terminology and one standard culture. I'll leave it at that. We have a very interesting second point, is that the second speaker is Professor Manish Labhade from JNU. Himself runs a very, very active lecture series, India Futures, and he will be speaking on the transformation. So Manish, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Shakti, sir. It's truly a deep, deep honor to be speaking in a session where you are chairing. I still, cannot forget that as the director of Teen Murti, you truly changed the profile of Nehru Memorial, making it a center of academic excellence. And really, the most interesting part, welcoming all guests with your infectious, cheerful spirit. So thanks again for everything. And obviously, I cannot but thank enough and compliment enough all the organizers today, NIICE and WPC, especially my friend Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, for really stitching this extravagance of ideas. It's a fantastic initiative, Pramod. Really, we all congratulate you. Today, I'm going to speak on, as you can see from the title, it's Transformation of Diplomacy, the COVID effect. So what exactly is the story I'm going to tell you? Let me be very brief in what exactly I'm telling you. It is really a tale, a story of what Martin White calls diplomacy, the master institution of international relations. So this is really that story. And what is the story? The story is of a dramatic overnight transformation, a story of adaptation, innovation, but in reality, and if you really parse and really go deeper, it is really about rapid acceleration of trends that were already visible, maybe not clearly, maybe not that clearly. What I'm also going to look at, what sort of actors, what sort of issues, what sort of processes undermine or have changed in the world of diplomacy. uh, obviously the basics of states continue to rule. So power politics is very much here. Power politics has not gone away. So that is within a larger framework. I think that that basic lesson we really need to understand. In fact, Graham Allison of Harvard University, speaking at some recent conference, clearly pointed out, which I'm sure all of us would agree, that Corona really came like a lightning bolt that illuminated sharply all the trends and realities of all the levels of human interactions, and obviously including diplomacy, which I'm going to talk about. I will obviously be touching about the Indian experiences and end with talking about challenges ahead for diplomacy in the Corona world and obviously in the post-Corona age. So obviously the starting point is COVID effect. The first and foremost, impact of COVID on diplomacy is complete end to face-to-face meetings, parties, conferences, interactions. It also meant some sort of confinement. Obviously, social distancing came in. Sanitary measures also have kicked in. So Shakti sir is a big. He also operates successfully in various diplomatic circuits and has been a party to many diplomatic roles, including when he was PS to Prime Minister Vajpayee. So he would tell us so important it is to have a side conversation, to have a side chat, to have an informal conversation over a cup of tea, over drinks, over dinner, over food. So I think that has really come to an end. And at some stage, in fact, many scholars and writers are already saying that it is really a death of diplomacy. In fact, some of the pieces are already writing obituaries, different theoreticians and practitioners of diplomacy. But actually, is that the case? In fact, if you look at past writings, we have been here, we have seen this before, in the sense that when telegraph came, exactly this was talked about. When telephone came, obviously people say, okay, now that one can easily reach out, so that is going to be the end of diplomacy. Diplomacy is dead. Same with the internet. Then you have the mainstream media, the CNN effect, and now obviously social media. I mean, obviously when Trump is tweeting after midnight, after late midnight, so what is that? Why do we need diplomats? So he is directly communicating to anyone he wants via his Twitter handle. So this whole death of diplomacy talk is really overblown, is oversold, overhyped. So that is one thing which we need to understand, that the COVID has not put an end to diplomacy. Number two, negotiations, the centerpiece of diplomacy. In fact, diplomacy is also used synonymously, interchangeably with negotiations. The Oxford Dictionary, in fact, calls diplomacy as international behavior or international behavior using negotiation. So what has COVID done? That the negotiations have now shifted to virtual rooms. So you have like what we are doing now, people sitting in different time zones, negotiators sitting in different time zones. There is now instant decision making, obviously because of because across the screen using FaceTime. But also very important that earlier you had a galaxy of technical support, technical field experts, the so-called experts. So that access, that support to negotiators have slightly circumscribed, and I'll come to that later. But what you essentially see now is a sort of surge of specialized diplomacy, where actually the real focus is now on technical knowledge and innovation-based approach, obviously because of the nature of the issues which are being talked about today in the corona pandemic age. So what sort of issues are we talking about? The diplomatic agenda now is really full of health and science diplomacy. So now you're essentially talking about vaccines, you're talking about international collaborations, you're talking about access to those vaccines by different governments, through private sector, through informal sector. So then that is one part. The other is in terms of protective equipment. So you're also talking about PPA gears, what sort of protective equipment for corona warriors, to the doctors, to the medical staff, throughout the different parts of the world. So that is the conversation, that those are the issues now really are at the top of the agenda. And again, this is not only at purely bilateral level, but also at the multilateral level. The diplomatic agenda has now exactly moved towards resolving or towards really addressing the corona pandemic. So that is number one point we need to understand in today's times. In that arena also, you can see a diplomatic contest already on. So you had initial controversies again by President Trump talking about HCQs, talking about WHO role in COVID in Wuhan, obviously. So in fact, going to an extent that, why are we calling it a COVID virus? Why aren't we calling it Wuhan virus? Why aren't we calling it Chinese virus? So pinning blame on China also became a part of that diplomatic agenda when the pandemic kicked in. So, for example, you had Australia asking for an inquiry, obviously leading to threatening by China in more ways than one, and very visibly, very clearly. That is one aspect. In terms of the diplomatic requirements, in terms of the diplomatic skills, which now came to be defined because of the corona pandemic, is obviously that diplomats now had to really upgrade their digital skills. So that became very important, that you are using Zoom, you are using whatever, virtual platforms. So how comfortably you can operate. I'm sure many of us would also have seen UN Security Council meetings. Some of them were shown that ultimately some were not able to hear, some screen was missing. So these sorts of what sort of digital skills also, they become very important in these times. Also a very important issue was the question of meaningful connectivity. That are the connect I mean can one easily connectivity, what are the internet speeds, what are the data speeds. And because ultimately that also affected at times positively or even negatively on virtual dialogues, on conversations between the stakeholders. Also very important issue came about was this. Suddenly you also see that the world is now also talking about bridging of digital divides, that ultimately there is a real digital divide between the north and the south, between the west and the east, between Asian countries and the European countries. So I think that really also assumed center stage in international diplomacy in many ways. Another very important effect of COVID was the nature of the job of foreign ministries. I think that really transformed in many foreign ministries. So the single most important issue, which was now the job of the foreign ministries, was really the consular access for citizens stranded abroad. That what I mean look at, for example, all the if you look at different websites or different Facebook or Twitter handles of different embassies, look at, people were in panic. People were saying that, "Arey, when is the return flight where we want to go back to our own countries? Please, help us." So those distress panic calls, I think that became the major focus of attention. That the ministries, the embassies had now to, or even the ministries, the foreign ministries had now to constantly upgrade, constantly give information on repatriation procedures, return flights, when are they coming, when are they going, when are they going to be possible. So I think that was one aspect. The number two, so this was the consular assistance. And the number two also obviously was showing solidarity with your own population and even with your local population. So look at, for example, embassies in, for example, in Seoul, in Japan, in Tokyo, in Bangkok. If you look at their Twitter, Facebook handles, immediately you would see, and you can immediately make out that at some level they were trying to show solidarity with the local population, with their own, with own Indian citizens. So very important, duty of the ministries and embassies in this age. Again, and also very important development of joint responses to corona. So to what extent are you aligning yourself with the local authorities in those specific countries, in those specific cities, and really showing that you are standing with them, with these countries, with their peoples. So I think that became very much an integral part of the activity of those embassies. Again, very important, another important, as I said earlier, was the search for medical equipment. So you have inventories like protective gear, ventilating machines, medicines, obviously, HCQs, paracetamol. I think that became a center point for many embassies and ministries. Obviously, when I'm saying ministries, it is really the extent of his ministry. Then again, fostering international collaborations for vaccine search. But the most important, the most important activity of the foreign ministries and embassies was to really counter the digital disinformation. so much fake news coming on. I mean, it started all the way from on the origins of virus in Wuhan. Was it a lab? Was it a defense factory? Was it a biological weapon? And again, also that did China actually weaponize its virus and really let it loose in different parts of the world? So all those conspiracy theories, to an extent, that is that the start of the World War III, or are we entering into that period? So all sorts of digital, because it's so easy now to communicate, and to communicate even fake news. So that really also became a central principle, objective of embassies and foreign ministries, to really counter that disinformation. Another very important aspect which I would like to talk about is in terms of processes. That what really, when you talk about diplomacy, it is really about negotiation. It is really about who represents, a particular state, but it is also what sort of diplomacy, what is the process through which this is conducted, and the answer obviously is bilateral and multilateral both. That is that you're not dealing only with one-to-one, but also multilaterally with a group of different countries. So you have the summits still on. You have the G8, the G20, SCO summits, and even earlier NAM also. We'll come to that later. But also, most importantly, as I said, moving the entire process from face to face to virtual diplomacy through FaceTime. Then you have public diplomacy. In terms of process, that you are now actually reaching out to much actively, much intensely, which was not the case earlier. If you look at the Indian case, and again I'll come to that later, or even generally globally, that it was especially since obviously the internet, sort of social media and everything came from 2005 onwards. It really picked up steam, but the real substantive engagement, a dialogic sort of engagement, started only in 2015-16. And now obviously that has accelerated dramatically post-COVID. Very important focus area, as I said, was health diplomacy. But again, big data analytics, I think, has really become very important in conducting diplomacy in these times. So what exactly are you doing with that? So embassies and ministries are now using their own capabilities to really track the global and even national spread. To what extent is it happening in Bangladesh? To what extent is it, if you have that capability in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, in US? So I think, or in China. So that sort of data, big data, but technology is being used, and also to understand what sort of images, what sort of imagery is going out. I think that is very important aspect of even Corona, in terms of responding to Corona pandemic. So the basic point, which again has been highlighted, is the question of nation branding, state branding. How are states being seen now? For example, some states are seen as early responders. Some states are seen as success stories in handling pandemic, and again coupled with their own national values. So you have Taiwan celebrating its own, and that's exactly, you see, suddenly there seems to be a lot of international support. On Taiwan. Look at the South Korean case. But obviously, you now see that the pandemic, the corona, there is also now a surge of cases even in South Korea, and some sort of social distancing is now being enforced. So, what sort of that success stories are being really played to an advantage by these countries. But obviously, you also have cases of failure like Spain. America obviously has emerged as one of, and again that is really affecting negatively its image and its soft power in many ways, because of the mishandling of the corona by the Trump administration. Very important when you talk about state branding or nation branding. I think one has to carefully see what China is doing. And it's a wonderful story. It's a remarkable story of transformation again in nation branding, that you really started out as a villain. China really started out as a villain of this whole corona pandemic, and now gradually has moved to being seen as a success story in terms of handling the pandemic. The later, in terms of other things will come later, but at least in terms of handling the pandemic, it is now seen as a success story. I'm sure all of you, or most of you, would have seen pictures of the party in Wuhan, and showing that everything is now back to normal. And Wuhan obviously is the ground zero of COVID. The images really give a very different sense of what China has. It does it now because of its government system has really managed to succeed in battling corona very successfully. Economic activity there is back on track, and again the growth seems to be zooming and speeding. So that is the sort of image which is now coming out of China in terms of, and again I'm talking about only in terms of the managing of the COVID pandemic. With this, I think let's now move to understanding the Indian story, the Indian experiences. And we all would happily recollect that 2020, this year really, I mean, began with a bang in terms of diplomatic highs, with the President Trump coming to Ahmedabad, coming to Motera Stadium. And suddenly you see that because of the corona, everything has come down. But but again, very important. Look at Namaste going global now. So I think that I think really brought smiles to the entire country. That Namaste has suddenly become that Indian value of greeting. Is now you see different world leaders doing it. So that also added to India's soft power in many ways. But again, coming to the basics, India really took an early lead of sorts in terms of responding to these dramatic changes in the diplomatic landscape because of COVID. So most important, you see that there was a shift from personal to virtual diplomacy. And we all know that Prime Minister Modi prefers highest level symmetry, is known to have excellent personal chemistry with leaders like Obama, Trump, she may be, but not now after what has happened in Galwan. But Abe, definitely Shinzo Abe, who just resigned as Prime Minister of Japan, but also multilaterally in terms of ASEAN. So I think that handicap seems to have melted away for Prime Minister Modi in more ways than one. So you have, in fact, moving towards virtual front, not just by Prime Minister Modi, which is at the highest level, but also external affairs ministers, and down the ladder, you also have different secretaries now getting into that mode of a virtual mode. So you have, in fact, the first bilateral summit with Australia, then also multilateral summits, most famously and very early with SARC. You had with NAM, you have with G20, and now later many others. External affairs minister, obviously, he has his own S. Shankar. He has his own bilaterals and multilaterals with the BRICS, with the SCO, foreign ministers, obviously at the foreign ministers level, but bilaterals also with states from different parts of the globe. In fact, many countries, not many, know about. He took this opportunity to really talk to them, to really interact with them. I think that's a fantastic part about how diplomacy was transformed successfully by India. In terms of the diplomatic agenda, in fact, again, here Prime Minister Modi really took a lead of sorts and interacted way back on March 30th itself with heads of missions, 130, 140 heads of missions throughout the globe, Indian heads of missions. And very importantly, and again I quote him here, he's saying that he urged to remain alert to developments in global efforts against COVID, including, very importantly, he said, breakthroughs to help national efforts to fight COVID. I think so. In that sense, I mean, the Indian diplomatic establishment was very clear that it really, I mean, despite the end to foreign travel, ending all sort of air travel, it really did not close itself down to the world. It really wanted all the embassies, its heads of missions, to be alert about gauging different responses, international responses, wherever in different parts of the world. Again, very important part was of Indian diplomatic response was about sharing and caring. I mean, and again, these responses not only came from the government side, but from the societal responses. In fact, Ashok Malik also recently said that that is the beauty of the Indian responses, that it really came more from society. And in fact, that triggered more and more action by the MEA. And again, health was now seen as a global, sort of global good, and India really had to come up front in cause of health diplomacy, in the cause of health security. So you have the HCQs being exported, and then again rapid medical response teams to very important where there were crisis locations like Kuwait, Mali. And in fact, there was a Times of India report way back in May itself that India had exported to almost 133 countries HCQs and paracetamol tablets, again at many places as grants, but also on commercial basis. And again, after identifying and after taking stock of the Indian situation, obviously after a very big spat between Trump, almost threatening India, but after making evaluations from the Indian side, India, also exported HCQ to the US also, which all of us are aware of. Uh, Very important development, very important initiative, the Vande Bharat mission. Again, a very huge logistics challenge, because it was not just about simply getting our own nationals, our own citizens from different parts of the world, but bringing them not to Delhi, but bringing them to different parts of to Lucknow, to Kochi, to Mumbai, to Ahmedabad. So I mean that was a huge logistics challenge, I think, which the MEA successfully handled it. And again, one of the very important one of the very important was not just this physical doing things, but also in terms of psychological influence, the psychological calming balm which the MEA through different embassies did. Obviously, in terms of, because as I said, if you please, if you just look at the Twitter and the Facebook timelines of different embassies, so much panic. मेरा बेटा वहां पर फंसा हुआ है, मेरी माँ वहां पर है, my father is there, how do I get them back, what is really happening, what is happening in China, what is happening in Iran. So I think that sort of that okay, many that okay, no, that the government of India is making active efforts, and again sort of cooling down tempers, suggesting yoga, that how yoga would also help. So you also have suddenly that if you look at again embassies really talking about conducting online yoga classes. So I think at some level it was that human touch was being brought about by the MEA, which is very important aspect. Another, okay, we were also talking about our own citizens, but many foreign nationals who were already in India, many students, they had to be repatriated back to their own countries. So India really facilitated that on a fast track basis, which also earned brownie points for India in different capitals. Another very important aspect, obviously, was economic diplomacy. And again, here India was really talking about, or India really was trying to secure supply chains, obviously, on critical items. And a very important public diplomacy, very important economic diplomacy statement of intent was the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, a self-reliant India. So what exactly was this? It was really about, be vocal for local. It was really also about, really competing internationally and producing for international markets. So you have the External Affairs Minister and the Commerce Ministry, the Commerce Minister, Piyush Goyal, really having also a very important session with the trade attaches in almost 131 missions abroad. And the talk was really about to promote trade, to promote investments, promote exports. So very important, larger gamut that India didn't stop doing what it had to. So as a country with economic wanting to really spur economic growth, I think this was a fantastic initiative by the MEA, by the government of India. Then very important, as I said, the power politics will continue. So India really joined the coalition of the willing. So you have Quad, we have the Quad Plus, the talk about G17, India expressing readiness to do it. Very important aspect. And again, very important last aspect of the Indian involvement was about the whole this nation branding. And what sort of nation branding was India talking about? What sort of values it was promoting? It was sending out internationally. And here, the repeated references to Vasudeva Kutumbakam, that the world is one family, and India's sides, or India was on the side of managing the pandemic in humane ways by sending, as I said earlier, in terms of sending medical supplies and all sorts of, being very, positive in many ways. And again, India was also seen as a relative success story with obviously 1.4 billion population. The numbers are still increasing, worrying sign, but still looking at the number of population, I think India still remains an island of success in terms of managing pandemic. Obviously with economic unlock down, the unlocking phase also progressing. So you have HCQ being exported to friends, to new friends. So that is also increasing India's soft power and in fact strategic power in many capitals. The last part of my presentation is obviously talking about what sort of challenges when you talk about, okay, but diplomacy is being transformed in many ways, in more ways than one, but there are real serious challenges to conducting diplomacy even now. And again, as in fact Pramod was pointing out earlier, that what sort of access do I mean to adequate technologies. So do we have access to laptops? Do we have access to sufficient internet speeds? Forget about even internet speed. I think is a very important issue to the conduct of diplomacy. Again, very important point is this whole reshaping of communication protocols. Is there privacy? Is there privacy of communication? Is there privacy of, I mean, is there what sort of security issues are there? I think so. That is very important challenge which has emerged. Obviously, when you move to virtual negotiations, a number of challenges. I mean, at times it is, as I said, I mean, face-to-face meetings, a side chat, a five-side chat, a chat over a drink. I mean, I think at times that really breaks ice. So it has its own challenges. So virtual negotiations is also very important. I mean, has also its own limitations, which we cannot discount at all. A very important and negative impact on the developing world obviously is that it has led to, I mean, many scholars have already started writing about it, that there is now a digital underrepresentation because of less limited, because of very limited technical support, because of the number of personnel who can join, who can support, because many states are now actively countering or tackling pandemic. So I think that has also become a very important I mean, a resource challenge for many countries, many poor countries in Latin America and Africa. Uh, but again, despite I mean, whatever is happening, and there are many positive transformations happening. Uh, as I said, and which was my central argument, is that the power politics has not gone away. It is actively kicking in. And when it comes to pandemic, what you will essentially see now is that what sort of restrictions are being removed on COVID affected nations. So that is also going to be a point of contest. That is also going to be a point of politics. That, for example, if India is allowing, I mean, foreign nationals to travel from Japan, from South Korea, and not from China, so that is going to be seen as a big affront. If you're going to allow travel from European countries, from Britain, but not from Spain, not from different parts, so that is also going to create a diplomatic friction. That is going to be a challenge. Number two, as I said, another challenge, and again, which would be which would be a really a political contested space, a diplomatic contest also would about what sort of information security is there in diplomatic communication. For example, look at, I mean, despite I mean, what happened with WikiLeaks. So what sort of diplomatic communication is, I mean, what is somebody recording it? Is somebody violating privacy? So I think those sorts of issues is, for example, computer hacking. So these are going to be very important challenges. Another very important arena of power politics is going to be this whole bidding for COVID and health vaccines. So that is now going to be used as a leverage. For example, if India has good relations with a particular country, India is obviously definitely going to use its close connect, its close relationship to get more and more out of that country in terms of vaccines, in terms of protective equipment. So that leverage is going to come. If some state is producing vaccines which is successful, so those are going to really make a difference between who are our friends. So let's give those vaccines to our friends first. So that is definitely going to be another diplomatic landmine which all states have to navigate carefully. And most important, but I cannot, I mean, anyone would, I mean, see and agree about China's World Border diplomacy. I mean, what is happening is that China is now becoming suddenly very aggressive, becoming very assertive, and that is also a big challenge in pandemic age and also in the post-COVID world. I think this is the larger picture is that, okay, diplomacy, the ways of diplomacy seem to have transformed, but the issues are really going to be core traditional security issues. I mean, even look at what had happened in Galwan. Despite that, I mean, Galwan has really brought bear to all of us in India and even abroad. I mean, what is happening in South China Sea, that, you know, that the traditional security challenge, for example, for India, it is going to be China. That is going to remain central, and India needs to address those challenges in the diplomatic arena, but also in the military arena. And how India is going to do that remains a big question mark. But on an ending on a, I mean, positive note, that 2020 obviously started in a big diplomatic gain for India with Trump visit, and in fact 2020 is also going to end on a positive note, in the sense that 2021 India is going to start its new role, its new avatar as a non-permanent member of UN Security Council. And I think we all are looking actively forward to that sort of that term. And I think in that sense, it is going to be a big diplomatic, I mean, again, a challenge and again, an opportunity for India. So I think I'll stop here and I'll be happy to respond to questions, if any. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you for that very detailed exposition. And I'll start by reminding that the very famous American writer called Mark Twain. One day he picked up the newspaper and obituary was to him. He read his own obituary. So then he said, "News of my death is greatly exaggerated." So when you said that the news of the death of diplomacy is exaggerated, I agree with you. When telegraph came, people said, ambassadors of countries are known as ambassadors plenipotentiary. What does the word plenipotentiary mean? Plenipotentiary means the ability to take decisions independently. The host government has given them full power. Okay, you go negotiate and you finalize. So when telegrams came, people said that now we don't need plenipotentiaries because we can always ask them questions back. But diplomacy has continued, and it brought out a lot of different ways, whether bilateral, multilateral. But yes, the sideshows are missing. We'll have to compensate for it in different ways. It is not happening. But public diplomacy and the way it is now happening is very different from what was happening in the past. So I think in that sense, whether economically, whether in terms of reaching out to trade missions everywhere, or actually even negotiating. CPEC, in fact, not CPEC, the RCEP, in fact, is just about to be finalized very soon, because those countries are saying, now we can't wait, we'll now go ahead with it. Despite Corona, despite the lack of physical meeting, they aren't sure whether they'll physically meet, but they want to continue with it. So I think the world has changed a lot and will keep changing a lot, but there are serious issues of digital underrepresentation. There are other issues of privacy, leakage of information, as WikiLeaks shows, that it can be very damaging at times. And when you're able to leverage the situation better, depends on how well prepared you are. I think you really brought a lot of food for thought, Manish, so thank you very much. Our last speaker for the session is Anulika Saxena. She's a researcher, and I think her topic is really interesting. I find her topic when she talks about the biological weapons and the Biological Weapons Convention, problems and solutions. Anushka is a researcher, and in this digital world, probably sitting in Delhi, a researcher with the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement. So Anushka, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you're audible, but you're not visible. Not yet.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I hope the issue resolves over time.
Yeah.
Okay. My greetings and sincere gratitude to the Honorable Chair of the session, Shakti Sinha, sir. The distinguished speakers who made wonderful and very relevant presentations before me, especially Manish sir, for reminding us of the conspiracy theory that COVID-19 could have been manufactured in a lab in China, which gives a base perspective for my presentation. Respected organizers, especially promoters, for giving me this opportunity, and dear audiences. I'm a student of history at Lady Shri Ram College for Women, and I'm working as a researcher with NICE. Now, before I begin to speak with you about the Biological Weapons Convention, let me throw light on why we need it. So on 22nd, 23rd June 2001, certain private and governmental entities attempted a senior level war game to examine the intergovernmental and national security challenges of biological United States of America. So for disease control and prevention. In the game, the disease spread to 25 states and 15 other countries. 40 participants and 60 observers witnessed as the dynamic of a smallpox vaccine, roles and missions of federal and state governments, civil liberties, and the role of the Department of Defense, and potential military responses to the anonymous attack. Additionally, a predictable 24/7 news cycle was developed, and some 5 representatives from National Press Corps in the US conducted lengthy press conferences with the president. Now, it was found that an attack on the United States with a biological weapon could threaten vital national and international security interests. Massive civilian casualties, breakdowns in essential institutions, violation of democratic processes, civil disorder, loss of confidence in the government, and reduced US strategic flexibility in the world were found to be just some of the impacts that can be devastating for any nation. The then existing organizational structures and capabilities were not well
Your voice is breaking every now and then. Your voice is breaking, and some people are also complaining they can't hear you. And I couldn't hear you very clearly.
Anushka, can I request you to turn off your video because then your audio will be much clearer.
Yeah, I agree with Manish. I tried my phone also in between to get a better distance. I'm not getting.
Most importantly, dealing with the media after such an attack was found to be an immediate challenge for all levels of the government. The misinformation campaigns which we see prevalently today were in talks because of its high case threats to the civilian population. Now, understand the dynamics.
We have lost you. We have lost you.
So she was got muted.
Don't. If you meet all, obviously she gets muted. Anushka, last 1 minute. If you haven't heard you, can you go back?
Hi, am I audible now?
I think you should put your camera off because you're not audible.
Right, I'll do that. Yeah. So.
I can't hear you. Are you started speaking yet?
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So, like I was talking about the impacts of the war game or the bioterror simulation that was carried out. Now, it was found that an attack on the United States with biological weapons could threaten vital national security interests as well as cause harm to the international community. Massive civilian casualties, breakdowns in essential institutions, violation of democratic processes, civil disorder, loss of confidence in the government, and reduced US strategic flexibility abroad. These were found to be just some of the ways a biological attack might compromise any country's security. And since US was so badly impacted, it essentially meant at that point of time that any nation in the world, for any nation in the world, the impacts can be devastating. Now, the then existing organizational structures and capabilities were not well suited for the management of a bioweapon attack. Most importantly, dealing with the media after such an attack was found to be an immediate challenge for all levels of government. The misinformation campaigns, which we all very prevalently see today, were an important part of that bioterror attack. Now, smallpox, because of its high case fatality rates and transmissibility, represents one of the most serious biowarfare threats to the civilian population. Now, understand the dynamics here. In 1980, the World Health Assembly announced that smallpox had been eradicated and recommended that all countries cease vaccination. So it's only fair to say that its reappearance would indicate only an intentional outbreak, as can be seen in the case of the particular operation I discussed, which was called Operation Dark Winter. Aerosol release of smallpox virus disseminated even among a relatively small population could result in a significant epidemic. Even a small dose can be infectious, as can be seen in the case of dark winter. Several factors are causes for concern. For example, the disease has historically been feared as one of the most serious of all pestilential diseases. It is physically disfiguring. It bears a 30% case fatality rate. There is no
I have lost you. I don't know what the others. I have lost you. Anushka, we can't hear you. Om Prasad agrees with me. We can't hear you. Aruna Surabhi, can you help us out?
So yeah, ma'am, Anushka ma'am is there in the meeting.
cholera viruses to infect animals in Romania.
No. I had 3 words and that was it.
Anushka, please unmute yourself. You are muted.
Anushka, can you restart for the last 1 minute? We haven't heard you. Yeah, you're unmuted. Okay. Please restart for the last 1 minute. Yeah.
Sure, I'll do that. Actually, it's raining here, so I'm very apologetic, but I think there's a breakdown, so this is going to happen. So I'm very apologetic in advance.
Not your fault.
I'll just repeat what I said. So, like I mentioned, am I audible at the moment?
Yeah, you are very well audible. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Many apologies. Okay, so like I was saying, that smallpox, because of its high case fatality rates and transmissibility, represents one of the most serious biological warfare threats to civilian population. Now, the World Health Assembly announced that small. Actually, it's raining here, so I am very apologetic. I think there's a and it also asked and recommended countries to cease vaccination. So like I mentioned, am I audible? Thank you, sir. Like I was saying, that smallpox, because of its outbreak, can be seen in the case of the particular operation I discussed. The World Health Assembly announced it. Aerosol release is small, so it's only fair would indicate an intentional case of the particular operation I discussed. Dark winter, aerosol relatively small population, and even a small dose can be infectious. Winter. Several factors are causes for concern. For example, the disease has historically one of the most serious of all pestilential diseases. It is physically disfiguring. It bears a 30% case fatality rate. There is no cure, and it is communicable from person to person. So since the ceasing of vaccination was ordered by the WHO in 1980 itself, if countries were to face a release of smallpox today, their vaccination processes would take a long time, and by that time, we'd be dealing with an epidemic or a pandemic. So what we gather is that biological weapons are natural organisms and agents or cultured genetically engineered substances extracted from plants, animals, or even infected human beings with the intention of being used as weapons to inflict harm upon human populations, animals, plants, and even food and crops. So the earliest examples of bioweapons being used for war come from World War I. Wherein sophisticated evidence exists that Germany used
The last thing I heard from you, Anushka, was World War I when Germany used. That was the last phrase I heard from you. I don't know about the others.
Yes,
I
sir.
think,
I was
could you, as
there
Aruna
only.
suggested, could you
So,
go off or the connection is all right? Okay. So the last thing I heard was World War I, Germany used. Okay. I've not heard after that.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I was
Please
there
go.
only. So, yeah. So the earliest examples of bioweapons being used for war come from World War I, wherein sophisticated evidence exists of Germany having used agents like anthrax, glanders, and cholera viruses to infect animals in Romania and Argentina. Now, biological agents can also spread themselves quickly owing to human activities such as deforestation and industrialization, an example of which is the zoonotic livestock disease SARS-CoV, which infected 8,098 human beings in the 2003 epidemic. Please note that SARS-CoV is not being referred to here as a biological weapon, just as an example to demonstrate the impact that a biological agent can have. So public health authorities have often attempted to develop a system to prioritize biological agents according to their risk to national security. So category A agents are the highest priority and pose a risk to national security because they can be transmitted from person to person or result in high mortality, social disruption. So the threat is also added on to by the fact that transmissions of such agents can be through water or aerosol or food, and one will never know. So the earliest recognized attempts to subdue the development, stockpiling, and proliferation of biological agents as weapons was through the United Nations Geneva Protocol of 1925, which prohibited war of asphyxiating, poisonous, or other gases, and of bacteriological methods of warfare. And that was followed by the effective establishment of the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, which is the BWC, in 1975, which banned such activities. And I'm glad to be speaking about it this year since the UN is celebrating 75 years of its existence today, and the topic becomes more important both in the context of the anniversary and in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we understand that Biological Weapons Convention was the result of prolonged international negotiations to supplement the 1925 Geneva Protocol, which prohibited the use but not the possession, stockpiling, and development of chemical and biological weapons. Fortunately, the BWC does that. But there are multiple issues with the convention which fail to bring it into the 21st century. First is its lack of universality. 183 states parties are part of the BWC. So the 12 states that are yet to join, yet to deposit their ratification or accession to the convention have no purposeful reason to not do so, especially in today's scenario. With the 195 states parties being party to the BWC, we can have universal standards for banning an entire class of weapons of mass destruction. Second major issue with the BWC is the lack
I've lost you. I've lost you. You're muted also. Anushka, you have been muted. Now unmute. Please unmute yourself, Anushka. You were at the second issue. Anushka, can you unmute yourself? Or have we lost her? Can you hear me, Anushka? Mm-hmm. Host, can you tell me?
Perils of Zoom diplomacy.
Some limitations of Zoom diplomacy, I can see. Bono bhai? Bhaskar Sahib, Surabhi, Aruna, please tell me what can we do about it?
Yeah, Anushka ma'am is there in the meeting, but she's not.
I can see her name is there, but I can't hear her.
Yeah, she is even muted. I'll text her.
She's still muted. I can see her still muted.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Manish, there are two questions for you from Ashok Sajanhar. Please have a look at them in the chat box.
Sure, sir.
And Om Prasad, I shall ask my questions after Anushka finishes speaking. We have half an hour left of the session. So, Bolo, what to do?
So we wait for Anushka, yeah, we start with.
Let's wait. Yeah, we'll give it a minute.
Ma'am, join us.
Yeah, please go ahead, Anushka. No, that wasn't her. Who was that?
It was Surbhi Jain.
The Surabhi is muted, I can see.
I told that Anushka ma'am has joined us again, but now she's not audible.
Yeah, I rejoined. Is my connection better now?
Not really. It's not really. Your voice is breaking. But you can try. You were on that the second. Aha. Okay, you've muted yourself. Okay. Would you like to go off and then rejoin? Sometimes that helps. As Aruna had suggested some time ago.
But now?
Yeah, better. Good. The last two words I heard from you was the second.
Okay.
Please go ahead. Yeah. And that's frustrating for you. Please go ahead. You muted yourself. Why have you muted yourself? Ladies, gentlemen, please suggest a way out. I'm only the chair. You are the host. But she's still muted. I can see her. She's there, but she's muted, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Am I audible now? Finally, sir.
Yeah, you are audible.
Thank you. And I'm very sorry again. Okay. So we understand that the Biological Weapons Convention was the result of a prolonged international negotiation to supplement the 1925 Geneva Protocol, which prohibited the use but not the possession, stockpiling, or development of chemical and biological weapons. Fortunately, the BWC does that. However, there are multiple issues with the convention which fail to bring it into the 21st century. First is its lack of universality. So 183 state parties are have deposited their accession or ratification to the convention, but there are still 12 states parties that are yet to deposit the same, and they have no purposeful reason not to do so, especially in today's scenario. With 195 states parties being party to the BWC, we can have universal standards for banning an entire class of weapons of mass destruction. Second major issue with the BWC is the lack of mechanisms for monitoring of compliance and verification. So essentially, while there is a convention, there is no international body binding to the task of monitoring compliance of the states parties to the same, unlike the Chemical Weapons Convention, for which there is an organization for the prohibition of chemical weapons, or OPCW. There is an implementation support unit which was formed after the 6th review conference in 2006 to support state parties in the implementation of the BWC. But again, the functioning of the ISU, or the implementation support unit, is highly impeded in terms of funding and financing, as well as in terms of staffing. Now, in order to establish increased transparency, the concept of review conferences, which are high-level diplomatic meetings conducted at the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs in Geneva, Switzerland, came into being, and these review conferences are conducted at every 5 years. The 8th review conference was in 2016, and these review conferences have had some degree of success in terms of what states parties bring to the table. For example, in the 2nd review conference in 1986, the introduction of confidence building mechanisms, of CBMs, came in, which required annual reporting about activities of high biosafety level laboratories and the exchange of information on state parties and biodefense programs. But these CBMs were not legally binding, and so the states parties had no obligations to comply with them. Most importantly, verification of BWC compliance is also difficult, since biological agents can be cultured anywhere rapidly, especially for medicinal and peaceful purposes, and many such agents may occur naturally as well, making them very easy to obtain. This brings me to my next problem with the convention. So the Article 1, Subclause 1 of the convention states that the ban is on microbial or other biological agents or toxins of types and in quantities that have no justification for prophylactic or protective or other peaceful purposes. Now, this gives quite a leeway for states parties to keep stockpiling or developing agents on account of their prophylactic use. A simple example is Iran, which has quite a sophisticated biopharmaceutical industry, but at the same time, it has been found to possess agents like anthrax, botulinum toxin, and the plague bacteria, Yersinia pestis, all in the name of peaceful civilian purposes, which rings alarm bells for me. Finally, past and potential bioterrorist attacks reflect one of the Biological Weapon Convention's greatest failures. The document simply lacks the capacity to restrict the behavior of non-state actors who are considered typically far less powerful when the convention was drafted and formed. Then you see incidents like the Tokyo subway incident by the Aum Shinryo group in Japan, or the Rajneeshi salmonella incident in America, where cults are carrying out bioterror attacks. So the pace of biotechnology has expanded exponentially. Biological warfare can no longer be considered to be just in the purview of state actors. New genome editing tools have been developed. Dual use of bioagents is largely possible, and thereby this poses a challenge for strong prevention and response frameworks. So considering the fact that the world today is infested with actors who are primarily recognized as terrorist in nature, this particular inadequacy places the BWC in a very vulnerable position in a world increasingly aware of the threats of bioterrorism. Now, coming on to how to deal with these shortcomings. The first most important step would be the formation of a verification protocol, especially for countries that continue to develop stockpile and research on bioweaponry. Such a protocol was being discussed during the 5th review conference of the BWC in 2006, but negotiations broke down drastically. And I'm assuming that after the COVID-19 pandemic, the need for the same will be re-realized. Also, such a verification protocol must be supported by a bioverification panel, and such a panel should be appointed by every member country to investigate laboratories to research on biological agents and toxins on behalf of the implementation support unit, which I talked about earlier, to conduct such an investigation without bias or without causing harm to national security interests of any nation state. Such bodies should work collaboratively and maintain total transparency, and any information or development pertaining to biotechnology if it can be potentially used as or to create bioweaponry, should be directly reported to the ISC and to the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs in a confidential manner so that action can be taken. And of course, the functioning of these verification panels should be funded by states parties itself, those who are undertaking these investigations, or ask those who are undertaking. Secondly, there should be an international and it should seek to work specifically on that may or do serve as biological weapons. It should be formed as part of the UN ODA mandate and separate from the World Health Organization. So the biggest issue upon release of a bioterror agent is the lack of understanding about its pathogenesis and its epidemiology. So such a dedicated organization can help the world undertake the process of understanding.
I think we are running into trouble here. Again, we've lost you. I think sad that such an interesting topic we are missing out so much, because I think you really raised Anushka's.
Which will enable countries to take relevant steps. The organization should be funded by all cooperatively and not.
Anushka, I think we leave it there. Let's have some time for question and answers. I'm feeling sad that you've not been able to express yourself so clearly in the parts that we heard. And we heard a fair amount. It's not that we have not heard. We heard a fair amount of what you said. I think you raised very troubling questions, very important but very troubling questions, which most of us don't give thought to. How in biological weapons, the things are the lack of implementation, the lack of standardization, and the fact that despite everything, one can still restart the process naturally or
Any
semi-naturally.
information.
Anushka, we missed you for the last 2 minutes, so I don't think so you should now. We are missing you completely. I've heard one word, then silence, and one word again.
Pertaining to
If you can hear me, Anushka, I think we are now bringing your.
Sir, please carry on with question and answers.
That's what I'm saying, because it's really. But she did raise some very, very important issues, Anushka. Anushka, we have started the question and answers now, okay? So she did raise a very, very important, something that we really don't give thought to. We thought that with CWC world is over, but no, CWC is fine, but this is far more difficult.
Should be directly reported to.
Anushka, thank you. So Manish, there were 2 questions to you from Ashok Sajanhar. I'm not sure there were more questions. So if you could start with those 2 questions, Manish, I'll get back to asking other questions then.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Sajanhar. I think those are very important questions, very relevant questions. The point is, in fact, I was just, in the presentation itself, I was just looking at my Twitter timeline, and you already have news coverage, news reports of, for example, the Chinese foreign minister out already, moving past the whole, whatever isolation or whatever the closing down of foreign travel. So you have the Chinese foreign minister going to Europe. Japanese foreign minister, I was reading, has been to Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Indonesia, foreign minister Singapore. India, India, obviously, you rightly pointed out, development cooperation, plurilateralism are really our mainstays, are our strengths of India's diplomacy. But I think my sources in the MEA do tell me that Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar is beginning international travel as early as, after his book launch, I'm told. In fact, Rajnath Singh had been in the midst of the pandemic in June to Moscow, and again is going for the SCO meet, defense ministers meet. And we are also told, obviously, again privately, that that S. Jaishankar has been invited for again SCO foreign ministers meet in Moscow on the 10th of 10th of September, and in all likelihood, as I said, S. Jaishankar is also going to be in Moscow. So I think the wheels have really started moving again in terms of actual physical face-to-face meetings, and we have just seen the limits of Zoom as a platform. And again, one of the issues, diplomatic challenges, and that has also been pointed out, and now many writings are also coming in that Zoom has now become a critical infrastructure sort of support to conduct activities. So what if there is, again, these sorts of issues in terms of compatibility, in terms of internet speeds. So I think at some level, India and many states have already taken a call, and I think the diplomatic wheels have started to speak in that sense, have started moving again and are going to be back on track. But again, there are going to be limitations, obviously. They are not going to be as frequent, as visible, as public as we had seen prior to maybe March. But definitely, I think you hit it right that knowing our priorities, India is not going to sit back and let things move away. And we have already seen that in terms of virtual diplomacy, that with the China challenge, with what China was doing at Galwan, that India was very active even at the diplomatic front. I hope that answers your question, sir. Thank you.
My question now is to Om Prasad, and I'm glad you're back because I saw Om Prasad disappear. I got very worried. And my question is, you talked about this Nathola thing, and in the concept of border trade. Now, border trade, should we see it, as I said, as part of developing a commercial relationship between two neighboring regions, or do we see it as limiting it to a very low level of CBM? The reason I ask this question, if you look at border trade between India and Bangladesh, we have 8 points on it. India and Myanmar at More. I mentioned India and Pakistan. I've not mentioned it, India and Pakistan in the 2 points in Jammu Kashmir, Rawalkot, and on the Srinagar Muzaffarabad road. If you look at the sheer volumes, the volumes are very, very small, but it can have a lot of important local effects. How do you think countries should approach border trade? I mean, could they use it to develop much greater commercial relationship, or is it essentially limited in what it can do? Yes, Om Prasad, could you hear my question?
Hello. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, thank you for the question. That is a very important question.
So tell us your answer. Missing you. I think you're also having problems of internet.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Am I Fed can be seen as an important confidence building measure. Let me give example of Sikkim. Sikkim has amount of in India for 50 years. The recognition China, recognition of Sikkim by Chen was a hard, difficult task for India to face. And when China ultimately recognized Sikkim as part of India, now the social relationship existed historically between the people of Sikkim and the people of Tibet. It is historical in 1640s, the people of Tibet they traveled to Sikkim and established a kingdom. For the rulers of Sikkim till 1975 were actually the descendants of the Tibetan tribes. So in that sense, they have a huge socio-cultural relationship existed. Even still now, the relationship are being continued. And the Nathola trade has provided an opportunity to the traders, to the local traders who are essentially from the Bhutia and Lepcha community. And they have the border trade has helped them to re-establish that cultural relationship with the Tibetans living across the border. I throughout my conversations with the local traders here, they have said that the other side of traders are mostly of their relatives, and so the confidence building between the Tibetan communities of that side and Tibetan communities of this side is an important aspect in India-China relationship. Secondly, if you look at the commercial value of the trade, India China are engaged at around 80 billion dollars of trade, and and if you compare that with 80 crore rupees, it is very, very minuscule in nature. But that is not the important point here. The important point here is that we could establish the relationship which were which are dried up for 50 years, and the trade could establish some relationship. We cannot be called it a full-scale commercial relationship, but the idea behind confiding it to the people of Tibet and the people of Sikkim itself is that it is not seen from that commercial angle. Had it been seen that from that commercial angle,
Mhm.
it would not have been limited to certain items only Tibetan region produced only in Sikkim region. In fact, trade is not as as a mechanism we can build.
Mhm. I think we have lost him. I think we have lost you. But yes, you're right that it could not be seen in commercial terms. Otherwise, the items are so limited. If it was in commercial terms, you would open up for everything. And in fact, when the People's Liberation Army moved into Tibet from 1950 onwards, very soon they ran short of food and they had to import food. They did not import food from mainland China. It was so expensive and difficult, logistically impossible to do so. So they actually bought food in India, and food from India then went to Tibet to feed the People's Liberation Army while they were in the process of taking over the larger Tibet region. Have we lost Oprasad? Have we got him back? No, we have not got him back. I can't see him back. He's back. Yes, you're back. But you're muted. You're muted. Please unmute. Prashad, please unmute. You'll have to unmute yourself.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, the network problems. So the border trade here has to not to be seen from the commercial perspective, but as a process in which the cultural and social relationships were built earlier, and the continuation of those relationships to incur. The basic idea behind not giving permissions to others apart from Sikkimis to carry out the trade itself is an indication that the governments of India and China are trying to build that old relationships which existed during the 1960s and 1970s. So the commercial viability of the border trade cannot be seen from that commercial point of view. Secondly, the border trade also has encouraged the local productions, right? The local productions of Tibetan side, the local productions of the Sikkim side. So that is also an attempt, can be seen as an attempt to forge the relations between the people. Thirdly, the people who are involved in this border trade, they are not big business groups. Generally, the big business groups are the backbone to the trade between the countries across the world. The majority of the trade happens between the big business groups. Here, the trade is between the people, the locals. So it is the local identity that the Nathola trade has put forward, and the confidence building mechanism in that sense is also is an important aspect rather than the commercial angle to it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Anushka, are you around? Can you hear me? She's not around, is she? Mhm. So I think I can see no more questions. Let me just, yes, there is a question from Mr. Sheikh for Anushka, but Anushka doesn't seem to be around. It's a very interesting question regarding biological weapons convention. If any laboratory using technology for benefit of science or personal motive, is a provision regarding that? And the answer is yes, I think. But which is why the trouble is that enforcement becomes an issue because of lack of standardization and the fact that the line between doing good for humanity and being dangerous for humanity is a very thin one. One person's goodness can become the other person's problem. That is a reality. So I thought I'll just speak for a couple of minutes, not longer than that, because now we'll have to wind up very soon. And I think what is happening in the world is, I mean, I think the point was raised, I think Manish quoted Graham Allison very correctly, is that what the pandemic has done is that many of the underlying trends which were happening, some were undercurrent, you couldn't see it, some were happening. But the trouble with change is we don't see change till it has happened. We don't see the process of change. And what the pandemic has done is brought it out sharp focus. So it has suddenly changed our perspective. It is not that this was not happening. In fact, many of these changes, the webinar that we are doing today, was predicted by Alvin Toffler in 1970, the book called Future Shock. A lot of his predictions throughout the 80s and 70s and 80s were debated and seen as nonsensical. And people said that these are all science fiction. It'll never happen. But every day new science fiction is written. And we really don't know how much of that comes to reality. Because when it comes, we're not prepared for it. You know, the fact, and I always make the point all over wherever I speak, is that to me, this represents one of the greatest technological innovations of all times, because not only does it have more computing power than the spaceships which went to the moon 30 years ago, many times more than that, it has computing power and other power, memory, etc. But the fact is that this has replaced what? It has replaced the post office completely. You can even send money through it. So earlier days, you can send emails through it, but not money. Now you can send money through it. It has replaced the travel agent completely. It is fast replacing bookshops completely and standard shops, thanks to Flipkart and Amazon and other platforms. Earlier, we used to have a book, all of us have a book called the address book. We should note down phone numbers, names, etc., keep changing it over, not required anymore. It has replaced the calendar on the wall for dates, for keeping appointments. We used to have an appointment diary, keep notes. Today, none of that is required. Today, Google is so smart. When I get an email and I say yes to it, it asks me, do I save it on your calendar? So, I mean, the kind of things it has replaced, calculators we used to have separately. Well, where are the calculators anymore? I haven't seen any for a long time to come. And you're going to go on and on. It has replaced the standard phone, which for us in India at least meant a 15, 20-year waiting period now. So, so the way change comes, it comes in a very quiet, creeping manner, and you don't notice it. But suddenly the process of change, tremendous amount of dislocation takes place. And the worst thing is that the most of the people dislocated are not in a position to switch. Now, supposing manufacturing in China is shifting from the low end to the high end, which it should, because China's per capita income now, and the fact that exports as a percent of GDP has fallen and domestic consumption has gone up, China is shifting from export-led to a local consumption-led economy. Fine. In the process of it, low-end manufacturing is shifted out, Vietnam, Bangladesh primarily, and to others also. India, we're trying for it, but we're very low in the picture. These people have got more of it. What happens to the workers in China who were earlier employed in this business, the low-end manufacturing business? Over. They're 40, 45, 50 years old. Can they shift to the AI world, Internet of Things? The answer is no. So change is very dislocating, and what pandemic is doing to us is it is bringing out tremendous amounts of change, and therefore the need for us as thinkers, as people interested, as students, as researchers, to get involved and try to understand the kind of changes which is happening to better prepare our societies. Our societies are, so complex. We can't leave it to the governments. Government, who's the government? The governments are fast at the end of the day. So to help that process, we really must look into the kind of and anticipate some of the changes, and where change is happening, then try to figure out best ways to cope with the change. But if we can anticipate some change and be better prepared for it, we are better off. We'll always be behind the curve, I say, accept that fact. Fine. On most occasions, we're behind the curve. How much behind the curve are we? We don't talk about bullock carts anymore. I grew up in a world where all transportation in villages of Bihar was by bullock cart. We've forgotten it completely. Gone from our minds, right? But when it was changing, people were trying to improve bullock carts, remove the wooden wheel and put tires on it. So people tried to adjust in different ways. Others said, let's build road and get buses instead, which is the bullock cart fellow loses his job, etc. So, change is painful, but if you don't anticipate change or do not adjust fast enough to change, then you're yesterday's person, you're normal. Well, our societies are young societies. Our average ages are very young, in the mid-20s. We have to be really prepared for that tomorrow. Really work hard and look at every little aspect of it. No aspect. Who would have thought that biological weapons is something which will face us? We'd have forgotten it completely, that biological weapons is an instrument available to rogues, not necessarily rogue states, but even to rogue actors to disrupt. Or how things like the Nathola trade, things like other border trade, which are insignificant from the larger picture, absolutely insignificant from the larger picture, but which for a local society can make a lot of difference. If suddenly 600 or 6,000 trucks, or okay, 500 trucks, 300 families, 300 families of traders, 1,000 family of laborers and mazdoors and others involved. For them, it's a matter of life and death at times. And therefore, the need to understand those dynamics. So nothing is too small to be left out. We have to find out what are these pressure points, what are the points of inflection that we need to be better at. And I think we've done a very good job. And new technologies are available, big data is available, diplomacy is changing. We can use the changes happening for our benefit. It's not just disrupting negatively, it can be disruptive very, very positively, which Manish brought out. So I think with that, let me now wind up session 22. We have 3 speakers, not 4, and technology. The technology is good because the digital divide is still an issue. Not just access to technology. I have the internet, speeds are a problem, other things are a problem. We can lose out on that. How do we bridge this gap so that we are not underrepresented digitally? Because we need to be participants, we need to have agency, we need to contribute. So let me thank the 3 speakers for their very interesting, very, very thought-provoking presentation. And let me thank the Nepal Institute, the Pramod Jaiswal and your team. Let me thank the Water Policy Center, Rausa Bhauskar and his team, and of course, all of you listeners for what to me has been a very, very interesting session 22 of this 3-day seminar series. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We are
Thank you,
really
sir.
very. Oh. Thank you, sir. We are really very grateful you took the time out of your schedule to be the part of this session. Distinguished chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of the session, it is my great honor to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of NICE and Water Policy Center. I would like to express our gratitude and sincere thanks to Sir Mr. Shakti Sinha for accepting our request to chair the session. Our sincere thanks goes to all the speakers for delivering such a comprehensive and insightful presentation. We are honored to have all the speakers with us today. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Last but not the least, I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for our audience who have participated in webinar and those who are watching us live on YouTube. We are truly honored to have you all with us this morning and hopes to stay connected with you all in future as well. I request all of you kindly join us for the next session. Thank you.